Okay. No, I have to start. You got to get out of here. Give it 50 seconds. I have to talk. All right. I think we're live. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Brett Mayer. I'm the Policy and Stewardship Director for the American Canoe Association, and I will be your moderator this evening. We really appreciate everyone being here this evening with us. This is the first of 5 live stream sessions sponsored by the ACA Board of Directors in the coming months. This session is hosted by the ACA Board Public Policy Committee. I would love to take a moment to introduce and invite our panelists to say a little bit more about themselves and the work that they do to support the ACA. Andrea White, if you would like to kick us off this evening, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. It's so nice to be here. I am a member of the board of directors because I am chair for the Regional Activity Council. From a public policy perspective, I mostly get involved in things in state legislative level. So looking forward to all the things we're going to talk about tonight and representing the much broader board policy committee that we just had the slide up showing. There's lots of folks that serve on that committee. We're the lucky few that are just representing all the work that they're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. Pam Dillon, welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Pam Dillon. I am obviously a member of the Public Policy Committee. I was formerly on the board of directors as an independent director, and I also chaired the ACA Strategic Planning Committee. So it's really good to be here. My background is in public policy. I've had a career in working with state voting safety initiatives at both the state and the federal and national levels. So great to be with you all tonight.
Thanks for being here with us, Pam. Robin Pope.
Brett, thank you. And thanks to everybody for being here tonight. I am the immediate past chair of ACA's board of directors and currently serving as the chair of the Public Policy Committee. Most of my background in paddling is in paddling education. Right now, I'm involved in some policy work, though, with the Coast Guard Auxiliary, where I serve as the Deputy Director for Recreational Boating Safety Outreach. Also, I'm the liaison between ACA and Boy Scouting Sea Scout Program and their National Aquatics Committee, and have worked with NASBLA's Education Standards Policy, or excuse me, Education Standards Committee. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Robin. So as we go along this evening, please ask your questions in the chat. There's a little bit of a time delay between the broadcast and when your questions come in. So if you type your questions into the chat, we'll be able to do a better job of answering them as we go along. We also have saved a lot of time at the end of this session for an open Q&A with all of these fine leaders at the end. So feel free to wait until then. The ACA recently completed our 5-year strategic plan. And to kick us off this evening, the Stewardship and Public Policy part of our strategic plan has a few key performance indicators. One, develop and publish core paddling policy statements. This is a top priority of the board. Communicate policy and stewardship activity to our members, another board priority, and this is actually what we're doing here this evening. And then also creating stewardship resources for clubs, members, ACA staff, and others. With that, I'd like to move into some context about the ACA's public policy work at the national level. We'll describe that, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we do at the state level. Andrea, I'd love to invite you to tell us a little bit about the work the ACA does with national organizations.
Yeah, no, I mean, particularly at the federal level, we do an awful lot of work in partnership with other organizations, and that ranges from issues of access, general outdoor recreation issues, stewardship, safety. It can take a lot of different forms. But working with organizations like American Whitewater, like Outdoor Alliance, working with NASBLA, working with the Coast Guard, these are all invaluable partners for us to be able to join forces with other folks in boating, other folks in paddling, other folks in outdoor recreation in general, and really make a difference in the public policy realm with a group that is much larger than just the hands and feet of paddlers. Pam, you have done a ton of work with NASBLA and with all these organizations, really. Do you want to add to that?
Sure. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to collaborate with these other organizations. Much of our work within the ACA national office is done in collaboration and in support of paddling access of all forms, but we work closely with other national organizations that have that similar interest. We can do a lot of things by joining forces with others. And as a member organization, our members, ACA members, have a wide range of member interests, and we find it is generally most productive to team up with others to share expertise and multiply our collective voices at the grassroots level and at multiple levels. But Robin, I know you are aware there's many things that the ACA just uniquely can do. Robin, you are muted.
Yep, I've got a cold. I'm trying not to cough on people. Yeah, that national collaborative effort that we have can narrow down to the state and regional level where we've got our membership. Because even though we are a national organization, we're also a membership organization, and we're concerned about what every member has access to. We can bring that expertise that's developed at the national level and share that with the local paddling clubs, with individual paddlers, and with paddlers that are being affected by state policy issues, provide the expertise and provide some policy guidance. Much of what we deal with and what we see are state level issues that involve safety issues, that involve access, that might involve taxation or educational requirements. And having that national expertise does allow us to speak intelligently and authoritatively, helping support our members get access to the water and enjoy what they love doing. So, one of those issues is education. So Brett, you want to talk a minute about that?
Yeah. So mandatory education is one of those state level issues that we are really uniquely positioned to represent the paddling community. And actually, so the ACA is the nation's oldest paddling organization. We've been around for 150 years, and we've developed a lot of the teaching methods that inform most of the paddling curriculum that's out there in some way, shape, or form. Mandatory education is really it's all about a law that might restrict or require a paddler that's interested in paddling to get or to take a course before they actually can do that. And so, Robin, if you'd like to add some more to that, that'd be great.
Again, trying not to cough on people.
Okay.
Yeah, as you said, ACA has a long history of education and supporting education, and many of the paddling instructional methods that are being used now were developed by ACA instructors. One of the aspects of that is that ACA was involved in developing the national knowledge standards and skill standards for on-water boating education, particularly with the national on-water standards that really showed what a person could expect to learn in an entry-level paddling education class. When ACA and other organizations helped develop that, there were no laws that mandated education, and ACA, like other programs, including U.S. Sailing and American Sailing Association, did not move forward and have our classes approved. Essentially, we were already doing those classes, but now that there's potential for mandatory education, we want to make sure that our classes have been approved and are available and recognized as setting or at least meeting the standard. I believe in many cases we don't just meet the standard, we far exceed it, but we've got to have that documentation that shows that we do. And one of the organizations that helps do that is NASBLA. And Pam, you've as we said, have worked with them quite a bit, if you want to talk more about that.
Sure. Much of the mandatory education requirements in the states, virtually all of them, there might be a couple exceptions, require for power boaters to take some level of knowledge course. And so when we talk about mandatory education, in a lot of cases, people jump to the thought that we're talking a classroom course or an online course. It may not necessarily involve hands-on training in the water. And I think that's a key distinction about when people think about ACA courses. We put people in boats on the water. And of course, head knowledge is an important component of that. So when we hear about state initiatives or other regulations regarding required education, the ACA has, as a guiding principle, ACA obviously supports education, but we don't want to create barriers to paddling. You know, some regulations actually require a completion of a course with a card, a certificate issued before you can actually get in a boat on the water, or you need to be with someone that has that card. State regulations differ across the country. Not all states have requirements, but those that have requirements typically require completion of that course to operate a power boat. So what paddlers are looking at when they hear the term mandatory education, we want to make sure that we are not creating a barrier to paddling. So a lot of the ACA position statements have to be pretty specific in that legislation that may be proposed. And on a case-by-case basis, we need to work with states, we need to work with the communities to make sure the paddlers' interests in that particular state are heard, and they're at the table, and they're communicating with the regulatory bodies to make sure that paddlers' interests are truly taken into account whenever these issues come up. And that's a huge piece of what ACA and ACA members across the country can provide by communicating with those predominantly state individuals. We want to ensure in general that when these topics come up, that paddlers have a seat at the table and that the paddling community gets a benefit from whatever program is proposed. Because often there's financial requirements as part of the requirement. And if there's a fee or if there's a charge for a course, we want to make sure that the paddlers are benefiting not just from the education component, but from that fee structure. So, you know, there's a lot of communication that needs to go back and forth. And we need to get paddling leaders from those states involved in the conversation, form relationships with the state regulators or others who may be talking about those concepts, and for good reason. They're trying, as has been mentioned, they're trying to really address the growing number of paddlers and the fact that paddling mishaps grow. There's been increased numbers of deaths and fatalities because of the growing number of paddlers, and we're going to talk more about that, I'm sure, later. But in general, we want to make sure paddlers are at the table. And Andrea, you've got a great example of this from Washington State.
Yeah, no, there was a bill in the Washington State Legislature. I think it started 2 years ago. It came back last year. We think it's probably going to be back this year, where we had some ACA paddling leaders who testified to the state legislature both years and did a phenomenal job representing the interest of all of the paddlers in that state. When that bill first started, they wanted to require a paddler education, but the course the paddlers were going to take was actually a powerboat course. So as that bill has evolved over the years, they've now made it a more paddle sports centric course, which is awesome. That's showing that the voices of these paddlers testifying are making a difference. We are evolving the proposal. And I'm sure it will evolve again this year. But that's just one example of a bill that's in a state legislature that we've got to help refine these proposals to get them to be beneficial for their intended purpose, but also to really be beneficial to the paddler community. You know, powerboat folks, hunters, fishermen, they've all been in a pay-to-play world for a long time. And they have seen the benefits of their fees. They can see when parking lots are built and boat ramps are built, and they can see when, and we know when their money is helping fund biodiversity in the rivers and the waterways. There's all kinds of ways that, and you know, when the fish are stocked, I mean, there's all kinds of ways that their fees are visible to them, that it's benefiting their community. We just need to make sure that if similar programs are coming into the paddling world, that those programs have paddlers at the table, helping them make sure that we're going to see the benefits for paddlers and also for the waterways that we paddle.
Great example. Thank you all so much for for giving such a great synopsis of the work we do surrounding mandatory education. Another issue we see coming up more and more often in state legislatures is a trend in proposing mandatory life jackets. I would love to throw this topic out there to our panel. Pam, maybe you'd like to take it away.
Sure. Life jackets, so important to all of us in the paddling community. Life jackets are already required year-round in some states. Rhode Island just for paddlecraft, Rhode Island just passed a law. They're also required in colder months in a number of states. I believe Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts have seasonal wear requirements for the colder months of the year, to wear your life jacket whenever you're in a non-motorized or a canoe or kayak type craft. Some waterways, I know in West Virginia and in Maine, have mandatory life jacket wear requirements on some waterways, and there's requirements in other areas, local areas and waterways across the U.S. as well. As a state level, we understand that these mandatory wear requirements are really a very concerted effort to address mishaps and fatalities. We understand the pressures of and the resources that are required to go out and rescue, or worse yet, recover someone that has been in a mishap. Searches can range for days for missing persons, et cetera, et cetera. So life jacket wear is a recognized way that we can really make sure that people go out and, for a fun day of paddling, come back home again. And a number of states are looking at required life jacket wear. But mandatory life jacket wear, it obviously it doesn't fit for every type of paddling situation. And I know that there are a number, even in federal law, there are exemptions for when life jackets may be required. Robin, you've probably got some more information you want to share about that.
Sure, happy to. So ACA obviously approves of life jacket wear. We require life jacket wear in all of our insured programs, in all of our classes, with some very narrow exceptions, again, meeting federal regulations. And examples might be using a stand-up paddleboard in the surf zone. If you'll put the first slide up, please. But if we step back and look at some data, this really helps explain why mandatory life jacket wear is getting looked at. If we look at boating participation, data from the Coast Guard and from the Outdoor Foundation show that boating of all kinds, powerboat, sailboat, paddlecraft of all kinds, has been growing by about 1.6 million people per year. And paddling makes up about 60% of that growth. So we're on track to make up more than 50% of the boating population at some point in the future. Right now, paddlers make up, or people who identify as paddlers, make up about 40% of the population, and we're growing by nearly 1 million people per year. Kayak growth is the most predominant one, stand-up paddleboard next, and canoeing, disappointingly, is showing a slight decline per year. If you want to show the next slide. Unfortunately, that growth in participation is also showing a growth in fatalities. You can see the linear relationship here. As participation in kayaking grows, the death rate grows, and it works out to about 4 or 5 paddlers per million kayakers on the water. Canoeing and stand-up paddleboarding show a similar but less strong relationship. And next slide, please. And if we look at the accident types that paddlers are dealing with, and these are the fatal accidents, 85% of them involve accidentally getting in the water, falling off your board, capsizing your kayak, and 87% of the people who die paddling drown. Not a big surprise to anybody who paddles, but this really lends the idea that wearing a life jacket is a simple, safe, effective way to reduce the risk of dying while you're paddling. If we look at why paddlers are actually getting in the water, exposure to hazardous waters and inexperience are big reasons. if you're in hazardous waters, you want your life jacket. And then alcohol and drug use, unfortunately, also contribute. But if you're drunk and in the water, you're going to be a lot safer if you're wearing a life jacket. Take-home message is that most paddling deaths are preventable, and one of the easiest way to prevent them is to wear a life jacket. And Andrea, if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, guys, I know for us as instructors and as avid lifelong paddlers, most of us have had an experience in the water that taught us why we want to wear a life jacket. It's not a question in our minds anymore. I obviously wear them when I'm teaching. I encourage my students to wear them. I don't think it's a question for most of us but for a lot of people, this is a very controversial topic. So I want to put this in the context of how it actually happens that this is a bill in state legislatures, because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. The only time you see a state proposing something that legislators would consider a controversial proposal, like a mandatory life jacket, is when you've had an inordinate number of preventable deaths. And typically, when they've had an inordinate number of preventable deaths, they're choosing between presenting something like a life jacket law and something that's going to create a huge barrier to entry for paddlers. Think of it as boat registration. Think of it as really high parking fees. Think of it as permits to get on certain waterways and limiting capacity. If they're choosing between a mandatory life jacket law and a major barrier to access, there's going to come a time when we as national leaders and the paddling leaders in that state are going to have to make a very practical judgment call about what we want to support. And the bottom line is, no state legislature is going to pass a law because a nonprofit in Virginia told them that was a good idea. They're going to want to hear from the voters in that state. So we're going to be working with the paddling leaders in that state to figure out the right strategy and go testify in your own words about what you think the right thing to do is. And that may vary a little bit state to state based on the nature of that proposal, so that you have a very specific strategy for that bill in that state that reflects the opinions of the leaders in that state. So I grew up in Tennessee. I live in Georgia. When the topic of mandatory life jackets comes, very spirited. So I want to be very clear that we are aware of. We want people to build a lifelong paddling habit that they just can't shake. And we want this to be a fabulous, wonderful family bonding experience for folks with good experiences. And that usually means life jackets. But we also need to be very practical about the political realities. And we want to empower paddling leaders in the states to be able to address these bills in a powerful way.
And I think, Andrea, if I could add on there, the ACA is very supportive of the Coast Guard reviewing and approving ultimately new level 50 devices, which is a much more streamlined wearable type of life jacket in the future. We're not just saying that we will wear anything that's on the market. We recognize that there are circumstances, the heat, movement for certain types of activity. The ACA always advocates for more wearable devices, and that will continue even through all of these specific legislative initiatives. But level 50 devices are being looked at, which are much more streamlined and comfortable wear type devices.
And Jonathan in the Facebook comments here brings up a really good point. He's a K1 racer. I know in some of the competition events, there are some exceptions. We're obviously going to support competition. We're not trying to do anything that's competition. But I think we have to reflect that what the policymakers are focused on is the numbers that Robin talked about. They're focused on this huge increase in entry-level paddlers who don't have training and aren't wearing life jackets and are getting in trouble, and they're having to recover bodies because of it. And I mean, I don't know about you. I do know about you guys, actually. I will speak for you. I consider anybody who's putting a paddle in the water part of my community, part of my family in a sense. And I want to try to promote good norms.
I would
And
also say to, I'm sorry, I'd also say to Jonathan that the federal exemptions, federal and state exemptions for life jacket wear, if it is mandated, situation like you describe in your comments, K1 racing, that would be an exempt type of activity. Typically, races have safety personnel. There's many people around to assist, but it is specifically an exemption in federal law. And most states have adopted and follow that federal law.
and kind of adding on to that as well, drowning while wearing a life jacket. American Whitewater has collected data on whitewater fatalities, and it appears that most of those drownings while wearing a life jacket are occurring in whitewater, and they're associated with entrapments. So, someone is foot entrapped, they're caught in a strainer, their boat is pinned while they're upside down. Those are cases where life jacket wear is maybe not going to prevent the fatality. But if you're not wearing a life jacket in those cases, you're going to be even deeper in the water. You're going to be at higher risk. And it still makes sense to wear a life jacket. I don't know anybody paddling class 4 or 5 whitewater that thinks not wearing a life jacket while you're doing that is a good idea. Certainly not me.
Yeah, and Brett, I know we need to move on, but I'll just put a capstone on this. I want to give a shout out to Charlie Walbridge and his team at American Whitewater that have done such an amazing job tracking and analyzing the data behind paddler fatalities on moving water. They did a phenomenal analysis in 2020, starting in 2020, but it's continued since then. The number of deaths on flat water to class 2, I think they did class 1 and class 2, but obviously flat water just increases the number. Outnumbers all of the higher level whitewater deaths combined. What we're dealing with right now is the downside of our incredible, fantastic, wonderful growth and participation is that it's a hockey stick chart with a matching number of growing fatalities. And if life jackets will stop that, I mean, it's hard to be against that.
I think that's a great way to sum up that very spirited conversation, as Andrea said. So that brings us to our sort of third core policy issue, and that is this issue of how paddlers pay into the system. And this is perhaps like the most complicated example of just a policy arena where the ACA really needs to represent paddlers. Other user groups operate under a pay-to-play model, and there are many political forces that think paddlers should pay to play as well. How does the ACA approach this issue of pay to play? Robin?
Yeah, we approach it very sensitively because it is a challenging issue, and it's an issue where paddlers have generally not paid into the system, but have had some benefits from the system. Things like boat ramps, search and rescue, law enforcement, things that paddlers get advantage from are often paid through by the Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund. And that is funded through excise taxes on fishing gear and taxes on motorboat fuel. And I don't fish out of my whitewater boat, and I don't put an engine on my sea kayak, so I'm not paying into that system. There are plenty of anglers who are kayakers also that do pay into it, but we're still a much smaller fraction. The General Accounting Office recently did a survey looking at the impact of paddler use of resources that we're not paying for, and they essentially kind of threw up their hands and said, we can't figure it out. But we have a little bit of a bullseye on us, because people that are paying into that system are showing up and saying, oh, there are a bunch of boats or a bunch of cars with boat racks on top, and I can't park, and I paid into this system and they didn't. And whether or not that's true, that creates some multi-user conflicts, and we would like to avoid conflict with other user groups. It just isn't productive. Adding on to this, there was a recent study in Virginia that looked at expenditures, and they found that paddlers were taking up as much as 50% of the expenditures for search and rescue and recovery efforts and law enforcement efforts, which just added fuel to this fire. So we need to be looking at ways that we can be involved in the system. We have to be willing to sit at the table, and nobody wants to give up anything, but we have to be willing to say yes to some things in order to continue having access to the sport that we love and the waterways that we want to be on. So Andrea, you live in Georgia, which has had some success with that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, Robin, you mentioned at the federal level, it also often translates into excise taxes, so that it's kind of invisible to people because it just happens when you buy your gas or when you buy your sporting equipment, right? In Georgia, they actually did an interesting thing a few years ago where they created a portion of the state sales tax that when you shop at places like Academy or Dick's, there's a percentage, I think it's like 40% of the state sales tax at those kinds of stores, at that specific kind of store, is put in the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Fund. And it funds grants that go to all kinds of outdoor recreation experiences, whether that's building accesses, whether that's building soccer fields, whether that's funding a nonprofit that needs equipment. It funds all kinds of things. It helped give a little grant to my employer, Georgia River Network, for the app that we have with water trail information for paddlers. So that's a very unique state solution to try to create funding in a way that's a little bit invisible to the paddlers. In other paddlers in other states, they're putting up proposals that are how to get a license or how to get a permit or how to register your boat hull. And those conversations get more heated because it's not invisible to the paddler. And typically, when the state first proposes such a setup, the money is not going into a program where paddlers would see the benefit. Typically, where they're putting that money is into some version of the general fund for law enforcement on the water. And you need paddlers at the table to help guide that. I can tell you personally, this is a personal opinion. I don't want to reflect anybody but myself. I have a lot of heart for putting money into county volunteer swiftwater rescue squads that are sending paddlers home alive. I feel like that we have an opportunity to go to these legislators and regulators and lobby for that and tell them why that's important in a way that nobody else can speak to, because we're the ones they'll be sending home alive. So I again, paying for the parking lot so I can bring a car to the top and bottom of the river run, being able to see that the river in Nashville is continuing to get clearer and safer to paddle just in terms of water quality. All of those things have value, but we have to be able to show the value of what the paddlers are paying in to the paddlers who are paying in.
And Andrea, if I can reflect on that a little, you mentioned the local swiftwater rescue teams. Part of what ACA is doing is helping train those swiftwater rescue teams, which goes back to what we originally talked about, having that collaborative effort, making sure that everybody that's involved with the river, everybody that's involved with the water is looking at the big picture and is engaged and is seeing the benefit of paying attention to these policy issues.
And so,
but right now, nobody is lobbying for them to get money from this.
And so, in general, when you look at this from an ACA perspective, we've already said it's very, proposal specific. From the ACA board level, we really are advocating for three main points in these discussions. And number one, have paddlers involved in the conversation, and that needs to take place at the local level, in the state level. Obviously, the ACA National Office, Brett, the committee, others can give some guidance, but it's really the paddlers in those states that need to weigh in when there's a state proposal regarding a pay or a fee option. And we really want paddlers to develop those relationships with those regulators and the authorities so that they understand each other, they know who the contacts are, so that they can be invited at the table, that state person knows who to send a draft piece of legislation to get feedback from the paddling community. And that takes time, it takes energy, and that's something that needs to be developed. We also are advocating that the paddling communities and the waterways we paddle must benefit from the funding. We've seen some amazing proposals that create water trails, that provide perhaps some separation for those busy ramps and access areas where the power boaters are saying the paddlers are taking all the spots, by just separating a bit of the activity, building a really lower tech needed parking and put in area for paddlers. That is a good option for the paddling community, frees up that space. But this kind of funding that might be generated from a proposal can go to really provide that kind of support and benefit back to the paddling community and the waterways that we paddle. And the state and local paddling leaders have to be engaged and work together in the practical solution for that state. There have been proposals. Oregon is a great example that comes to mind, that the paddlers in Oregon worked with the Oregon State Marine Board to develop really a unique to this country type of solution to this very initial question of, hey, paddlers, you've got to contribute to the system. Let me just say that a lot of paddlers that I've talked with, because this topic has come up many, many times over the years, many paddlers don't realize the funding mechanism for the boating programs within their state. So the first thing you need to do is really look at that. Many think, oh, I pay my taxes, and so it goes back to support the boating program, but that is not the case in every state. Robin mentioned that many of the sport fish restoration and boating trust fund money, for some states, that's the only source of revenue they have, that and boat registrations. So when the boating community, the powerboat community, looks around and sees that money that they're contributing being, for many, many years, we've benefited as paddlers. And now the conversation, because of our growth, and there's so many of us in some areas, that it really is a serious topic of conversation. But you have to have that understanding of how your local state programs are funded and where the money comes from. And you can only really develop that understanding by doing your work, studying, looking at those topics. Bottom line, we need to be proactive. We need to be collaborative to come up with reasonable solutions where paddlers can see your money at work in the community. And I think that rising tide floats all boats. In this case, we could really benefit from some amazing opportunities by having these conversations.
Thanks so much, Pam. I see that Jonathan has a really great question here, and I can read it. He says, hunters and anglers take from the source and pay for it. Hikers and photographers and paddlers take only memories. Hikers also get rescued quite often. Why is it that paddlers are getting singled out? Can we help classify ourselves as closer to hikers? I know in some sensitive areas, hikers need permits like wild and scenic areas, and others are free to access. Can we use the hiking as an example of how paddlers are classified and how we access different environments? Does anyone want to address that or bring that into the conversation a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, that is a great point, because we are less consumptive than hunters and anglers. We're not removing a resource, so that's not something we should be paying for. But in many cases, we're taking advantage of making use of parking lots and things like that. it's a matter of looking at the funding source for those resources. If the hikers are taking advantage of state parks that are funded through state taxes or other local sources, that's one thing. If paddlers are using resources that are being paid for by the Sportfish Restoration Fund or by boating registration, then that creates the conflict. So that goes back to Pam's comment that we really need to understand how the funding is being provided before we can really provide any type of guidance. And that's why it's so important to have people on the local level who are engaged with this. The ACA's national office can provide those big picture things, but the big picture says at first, paddlers must be at the table designing the system. So yeah, that is a great point, and that is something that has been brought up, and I expect it will continue to be brought up because we're not polluting other than driving to the water. We're not taking fish out of it. We're not hunting. We do have a much lower impact than other types of boating. And so, arguably, we should have a lower financial cost, but that's a whole nother story to discuss.
Great question. And when I listen to all of our panelists speak about how we handle this sort of challenging issue of how paddlers pay into the system, I really hear paddlers must have a seat at the table, and they have to be engaged in designing a solution that ultimately, in some ways, it's visible to the paddling community that the paddling community is really benefiting from what the solution is. Those are the things that are vitally important. And what that might look like might be different in every state. There's 50 different states and 50 different potential ways of doing things. And if you're out there listening, that is really a call to action. If you are the ACA, if you're listening, and we need your voice. Andrea, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about the call to action. I'll get there in just a sec, but I did want to add one thing to Robin's point. Ever since the pandemic, one of the things that has been asserted, and I will say asserted because no one has proved it yet, but the whole loving our resources to death thing, the fact that we are crowding our parks and natural resources, the fact that there are concerns about trash and litter as we have less educated users on our waterways. That is a difficult problem to solve because you can't necessarily put a dumpster at the takeout if the takeout's gonna flood every so often because the dumpster ends up back in the river, right? So that becomes a challenging thing to solve. But there is a conversation we need to have about the changing ways paddlers are affecting the resource. And I'm not, saying that we're doing damage, but I'm saying that we owe it to ourselves to be a part of that conversation. And then in terms of this call to action, absolutely, we need y'all's help. I have put in the chat, and I'm not sure if it's posting, but yeah, thanks, Casey. Casey put it in for me. The link to the website on ACA, where if you want to find out who your state chair is, who your state director is for ACA, or who your regional chair is, in some cases there's a couple of vacancies, and if you step up in your state and see the state director is vacant, let one of us know and we'll get you involved. So reach out to one of us. We've got there's things you can do to help at the state level with your state council. There's things you can do to help your state director or your regional chair. We have a public policy committee as part of the Regional Activity Council that you could participate in and work on some of these issues at a regional level and not just a state level. And I'm sure we're going to have ways that will evolve as we go through the year, where Brett and Robin are going to be looking for help on the board policy committee. So, let one of us know if you want to get involved. There's opportunities, and we want to help you be an advocate for paddlers.
Yeah. Andrea, you said something at the beginning of your presentation, that this is a conversation, and a conversation has to be two ways. Paddlers have to be at the table, but we also have to listen to concerns that are raised by others, because we all want to be on the water. Nobody wants to go out there and have a fight. Nobody wants to get angry with people. We want to go out and enjoy ourselves. And the way to do that when there are conflicts is to sit down and have the conversation and figure out a solution that benefits everybody. Because I think looking at states like Oregon that have been very successful, there are solutions that will benefit everybody, but the solution that I come up with is going to be a little different than what you come up with, which is going to be different from what people from other sides of the fence are going to come up with. Join those together, we're going to get something that everybody's going to be able to live with. So thank you.
And what I find, I mean, consistently, every time I get to the table with the other user groups that and supposedly are the opposite side of the issue from us, is that we have way more in common than differences. I mean, we enjoy being outside, we enjoy nature, we enjoy biodiversity, we enjoy clean water, we enjoy being able to be out there with our friends and family and bond. We have lots of things in common with them. We have core central values in common with them. If we can have that conversation and we can find the common ground and we can deal with what are the actual observed problems in our state, in our region, and just address them head on, find the solution that works for all the parties. At my Christmas dinner table, we've got people who hunt and people who fish and people who paddle and people who hike and people who take photos. They're all at the same Christmas table. I mean, if you approach it as a conversation and look for the common ground, we can find solutions.
So here, paddling as a paddling community, looking to be collaborative and partner in finding solutions with other outdoor user groups, outdoor recreational user groups.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's ACA in the last. Here's another example. In the last year and a half, we've made tremendous strides developing a curriculum for kayak anglers and developing instructor certs for kayak anglers. We are building bridges with the fishing community, and that's going a long way because we have a whole lot more in common than we do different when it all comes down to it. So being able to build bridges with these other user groups helps us overcome problems when they arise.
And I'd just like to add some perspective. You know, I had a career with public agencies, and often many of the people in the public agencies are very passionate. They want to make a difference. They want to address a situation, a challenge that has come before them, and they really appreciate people that are willing to work with them, to talk through and to work toward a solution to a problem. And many of these discussions are really trying to address a challenge or a problem that has come up, and they really appreciate hearing different perspectives and working together on often compromising toward a solution that everybody can live with. So, you know, I can't advocate enough to really form a professional working relationship with those agency people, with the law enforcement community, with those that you're working with on a regular basis around the waterways, because they need you as much as you need them, and working together, many challenges can get addressed.
Well said. Thanks, Pam. I'm taking a peek at the comment box. We are nearing the end of our time, but I'm pretty sure we can give it another couple minutes and just see if there's any other additional questions that have come through.
Yeah, while we're just giving that a couple of minutes, I'll throw a plug in there. In a couple of weeks, on February 1st, we're doing the next one of these panels. Council is going to, we're only a year old. We were formed with the new bylaws in 2022. in October of 2022. We're just barely a year old. So most ACA members still don't understand all the work we're trying to do at the state and local level. And come join us again on the same format on February 1st and learn all about it.
And I'd just like to say that, Andrea's an ACA volunteer. I'm an ACA volunteer. Robin's an ACA volunteer. Brett, we're very fortunate to have him as an ACA national staff member. But there are opportunities and resources there for you to work with. And the Regional Activity Council, that live stream that's going to happen in a couple weeks. There'll be a lot more direction and information on how you can get involved. This webinar or live stream series was really a result of some of the discussions we had with you, the membership, that we needed more communication on issues. We needed to really advise and in some levels educate people on what the topics are and how nuanced they are. And we hope that this has been helpful in just raising your awareness on some of these topics. They're very complex, they're very challenging, but we know that working through them, we're going to really make a positive difference to the paddling community. Working together and moving forward.
We really appreciate everyone that's tuned in to be with us here this evening. Please reach out to us with any additional questions you might have. My email, Andrea's email is available. We really look forward to hearing with you and collaborating with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night. Thanks.